All right, good morning. Let's get started with the video overview of my dissertation defense. So the title I chose for the dissertation defense is called Practitioner-Driven Action Research, created by a practitioner for practitioners. This is actually the title of the third piece of the dissertation project, one of three. Which is focused on, you can see the word created, so that should cue you in that the whole purpose of this dissertation progress centers around artifact creation, the artifact being a framework titled Practitioner-Driven Action Research. Let's recap the motivation and contribution for this project. And we'll step back to September 2017, which is the second semester of the first year. And I was working at United States Special Operations Command on the practitioner side still. And my boss, who is an analytics guy, heard that I was a doctoral student, and he wanted to say, hey, whatever you're learning in your USF program, integrate as much as you can into our everyday workplace. And we focus more on problem solvings and helping operators break down operational problems and trying to find solutions. So I was very drawn to what was constantly being told and said as the practitioner researcher rather than an academic researcher. I don't see myself as an academic researcher, nor do I really strive to be a full-fledged academic researcher, but I want to be a practitioner researcher, one that can bring the scientific and the structural proceedings of research into the practitioner side. Simultaneously, I was very drawn to action research, and that was in our qualitative methods course. And breaking down action research, you can see there on the slide, the action is the actual change that you introduce in an environment, but the research piece to that is the why piece. Why is something happening that drives a change? And then why are you introducing a certain artifact or change into that process? And then what's the scientific background to support that? The two things that are contributions to this project, looking at helping approach problem solving as practitioner researchers, so not just for me, but my fellow practitioners initially at USSOCOM, and then help reduce what's called this practitioner academic gap, which I kept hearing about throughout the course. So I wanted to look at that a little bit deeper and say, how do practitioner researchers sort of fit in there? And is this new breed of terminal degree students and graduates can help affect that perceived gap paradigm? So research questions are fairly straightforward. RQ1 and RQ2 are essentially the same question, but they're focused on the two contributions. One, approach problem solving as practitioner researchers, and then how do you bridge that academic practice within SOCOM? The third RQ focuses more on the understanding piece. What are the perceived costs and benefits to practitioners if they apply an artifact such as PDAR within their organizations? So the first two focus on the change aspects. The third RQ focuses on the understanding piece. And I wanted to create something in my dissertation project. I tell people that I'm a process guy more than a theory builder or a conceptual thinker. I like to build things more on the applied sciences, more on the problem solving aspect than on traditional hypothesis testing or focusing more on basic scientists or basic research. So walking into this project, the overarching model and inspiration for both my project and then the actual year-long research project that I did with USSOCOM is focused around the detailed action research model, which I researched during the literature review, kind of stuck to it. Very simple approach. And it kind of underpins everything that I'm doing, not only to help execute the project that I did for SOCOM, but also as the foundation for developing and basically advancing a simple model into a more detailed and aggressive framework that serves as sort of a research tool for practitioners. Some of the key things that point out about action research is an iterative process, which you'll see how I went through several iterations in developing the framework. I also like the concept of having something being both subjective and objective. Subjective is more on the art side. Objective is more on the science side. And being able to integrate those two together allows you to have flexibility in your research, but still appreciating the rigor of a lot of objective science-based approaches. Research design and methodology. So I kind of walk through this in a couple of minutes. You remember I had 3 research questions. So RQ1 and RQ2, which are the blue, focus on that artifact that focuses on the change. That's underpinned by Sussman's original detailed action research plan. And it gets into the process and the rationale and research of artifact development. I took what was called an R3 approach, which it stands for reflect, revise, and refine, and you'll see that later on in the slides. Overall, the framework went through 6 iterations. I call it a 4-2 breakout. 4 were actually done during the research project I did for U.S. Special Operations Command, which was an action research project. And then 2 follow-ons. One was done leading up to the dissertation defense, and then the last version was done during when RQ3 took place during a field test with a bunch of students and practitioners at SOCOM. So the first one, RQ1, RQ2, all drives towards the artifact, which is that change I keep talking about. And then the third RQ is the RQ3, which is the practitioner side. And that gets into more of the research of the understanding piece. The first phase was done during the SOCOM research project. It was qualitative driven, consisted of a lot of short interviews. I was able to interview 32 practitioners to get their reflections on more of those, again, weighing those pros and cons of conducting action research and using an artifact in their organizations. Coding led to top 5 factors. Coding process was kind of straightforward. It was a in vivo coding where I took coding and basically evolved it into what I call motivational categories, workplace, interpersonal, and personal categories, or motivational categories. And then from those, I was able to generalize themes that supported what were the top 5. Okay, here are the top 5 factors I continually seed based on those interviews of those practitioners of what was the motivational, what were the deterrent factors of getting involved in action research type projects. The second phase was basically taking those top 5 factors and using a feedback worksheet in a more of a quantitative driven field test with 20 additional practitioners. And essentially refine down and look for consistencies. Are the factors the same? Are those practitioners, these are all the same type of cyberspace practitioners. So my unit of analysis stayed within that cyberspace community, but I believe it could be applied to any type of specific practitioner expertise sector. And again, that falls back into the whole understanding phase of the research methodology. So if we look at some of the research analysis, before we get into that, this is the actual portfolio itself. And I keep mentioning the US SOCOM project. So think of it as the first big step was the case study. And there are the titles of the work, Rethinking Critical Factor Analysis, where we did a research project for SOCOM, and we used action research, and we built an initial research model off of that Sussman model to start and to support that project. And then that project became sort of the test bed for the development of my own practitioner-driven action research framework. So that was the first piece. The second piece gets into the understanding. That's more the research aspect of the research questions itself. And then 3 piece is the actual artifact creation. And that's more of a practitioner workbook about how to apply the PDAR in the field to support action research projects. So 1, case study. 2 is heavy research emphasis. And then number 3, of course, is heavy practitioner driven with the actual framework itself. Overall, about 92 pages of work. So let's look at some of the outcomes. For phase 1, if you remember, these were the 32 qualitative short interviews. And this just breaks down, these are the questions that I kept asking and then sort of the prioritized responses. So I had 32 total interviews. And if you look at the values of the scores, the values are basically the outcomes. I was asking people to say what factors would motivate you the most and to provide 1 to 2, sometimes even 1 to 3 responses to that question. I gave them time to think about it. It wasn't like they had to respond back immediately because I was working with these folks over the course of a couple of days. And then if you look at one that says problem solving, it says a value of 30. So what that means is that of the 32 people interviewed, 30 of them had the problem solving, the actual, how do we say this? The actual workplace motivation to solve an organizational problem was very important to them. So 30 of 32 had that in their top 2 responses. Same thing for deterrence. Lack of research skills was also identified by 30 of 32. And then 28 of 32 identified an increased workload to be a big deterrent to them, meaning hey, we would love to do things more scientifically and apply actual research in our workplace, but I'm not really a good researcher, so I need help being a potential action, the PDAR framework to support it. And then, oh, by the way, this will increase my workload. So how does this work-life balance adjust? And that was something else that's good feedback for any manager. If you want them to approach something that's going to increase their workload, you have to, this can't be just a side project for them. You have to give them more time or dedication to actually do this in the workplace to be successful. So those are some of the key attributes that I were finding throughout the project itself. So continuing to phase 1, let's go back to RQ1 and 2, which is now the artifact. And I asked a very simple, straightforward question that if we were to create a sort of research tool or smart book for field use, what are the attributes that are most important to you that you're actually going to use it? This was a little bit more widespread. You could see there was nothing over specifically in the 30 or higher. Actually, they didn't want a lengthy book. They wanted something written in more practitioner-driven language, something they would understand more, rather than heavy academic templates and modules. Obviously, following a step-by-step approach, using real-world vignettes or examples, and have it be very flexible that it can apply to various situations and not just in this case, some people were worried about, well, is this only going to address issues for cyberspace practitioners? And I said, no, my big picture here with this framework is it's originally designed for military practitioner use, but the end product is looking to be a framework that can be used in any type of industry or business sector, and even applied by other DBA students who are looking to conduct perhaps action research as part of their own dissertation type of project. So all that was summarized in phase 1, and those factors were used to essentially narrow down and set up the second round, which gave me a prioritized list of key variables. And I wanted to kind of sort of validate these variables with another test group, see if I was basically getting the same type of outcomes. Because again, with action research, that's what you're looking for. You're looking for something that's predictive, consistent, repetitive. And if I keep hearing or seeing the same things, then I have confidence that the action, which is the change, is actually working and actually being valid. So So that second phase, which was a field test done in March of this year, was here's a couple key data findings that I found. We did 6 iterations of the framework, which I think I cover in the next slide, over the course of 18 months. And I'll explain sort of the rationale of what drove me from one iteration to another. As far as the data outcomes, there was a lot of consistency between the qualitative and then quantitative results. Practitioners still remained overall motivated to solve organizational problems collectively with their peers in order to gain a deeper knowledge of a specific subject. So what I would say as a big key outcome there was that practitioners are driven more by the workplace and interpersonal skills over their own personal motivations, at least. At least that's what the data kind of says in this sample. Relatively small, 52 people, but a decent enough sample to kind of deduct that outcome. As far as what the cons or the deterrents, overwhelmingly it was a lack of research experience and very concerned about the need to balance research with workload. So here is more kind of a personal deterrent thing. People thought, oh, I'm not very good at research and I'm not doing anything unless you can balance my current workload. So a little bit of a unique shift between those two motivational factors. And then, of course, the attributes for the actual SmartBook or PDAR framework itself remain constant. They wanted something operationally focused, not lengthy, and definitely using language that can be understood perhaps by the common practitioner and not having to have a terminal degree to essentially understand what the framework is trying to help you achieve and assist. So that was most of the data findings about the understanding piece. Let's switch back to RQ1 and 2, which was the actual artifact. A key aspect of action research is going through an iterative process, constantly revising, refining, trying to decide how to move on from one phase to another. That kind of gets into that R3 approach that I discussed. Remember the 4-2 process I talked about. So the first 4, you see version 1, version 2, version 3, version 4 were actually done during the year-long US SOCOM project. And my criteria for revising these was essentially after each phase of version 1. Version 1 was the framework I used to conduct the action research project for SOCOM. So every time I went through after phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, and phase 5, I did an iteration of that framework. So for example, the December 17 V2 happened after in that October-December timeframe that you see on the version 1 time slide, and then following through. So as the project ended up in August of last year, I was up to version 4. Then during my dissertation preparation and feedback with other practitioners and then other research professionals and associating the framework, I went through a constant reflect, revise, and refine approach all the way through January 19, which led me to version 5, and then I stopped. And I basically said, all right, this will be the test bed for the field test. And then the biggest thing that came out of there, of course, you could see the first one was circular. Then I transitioned to a linear model in August of 18. And then people kept saying, well, this seems like more of a circular approach. And I kind of fought my own bias there, and I didn't really want to change it. But then finally, the last field test, they basically said, hey, this would be better if it was actually a wheel or a cycle. Because if you keep saying you want to go through the process and if you have to jump out of it and go backwards, it will be better to do it in a cycle. So finally, And that's exactly what action research is designed to do, is to help with that, that constant refinement. You can see the big change from version 5 to version 6, where I went from that linear sort of illustration back to a finalized circular motion. So the version 6 is the sort of the outcome of the entire iterative process that went through sort of 6 iterations. So with that said, where do we go? And on the left, you see the as far as my dissertation is concerned, the finalized practitioner artifact, which is titled Practitioner-Driven Action Research. Again, inspired by Gerald Sussman's original 5-phase project in 1983. And the way I look at this is the whole part of academics is to advance theories, to advance constructs, to advance prior research, and to keep moving it forward. So to me, this is an advancement of the works like Sussman and action research, and it's no longer a model. I call this a framework because this has essential tasks, which I put in there, and that's what the little boxes are for. Basically 5 in each of the phases, so it's sort of, think of it as a 6x5 approach. And as you go through the third document of the portfolio, you have the book itself, which incorporates a lot of the attributes that we talked about. It's written up as a step-by-step approach. It has real-world examples. The vernacular is more practitioner-driven rather than very heavy or unique academic terms. The other thing is I tried to avoid all military terms as well, because trying to understand military terms and acronyms can be just as painful as understanding academic acronyms and terms as well. So I think it's written by a practitioner for practitioners. That's my made to stick sort of title for this. And it's only 24 pages. My goal was to keep it under 20, but I really needed to incorporate better real-world examples, and this was recommended by Tim and Grandin as well. So it just reinforced the notion of making sure that those get put into the book. So you see several appendices, either appendices or tabs. I can't remember which one off the top of my head, but you can see the one here in the background. This is sort of the coding scheme, the descriptive coding that we used in our own research project for SOCOM, to give you the examples of how we did coding, and then that ties back into the actual step itself where it says do coding. So I do look at it as a smart book, research tool, handbook. To finalize the actual name is maybe to be determined, but the bottom line is you have an illustrative framework, and then you have a sort of how-to guide to go with it, rather than just a framework that gets published and then it's overly sort of subjective in how you use it. So it does add a mixture of structure and flexibility at the same time, which I think is overall fits right into those contributions that I mentioned. Something for the practitioner researcher. And because it incorporates, you can see these advisory group sessions on the chart itself. Those advisory group sessions are pauses in this framework to say, hey, is there a mechanism for you to deal and engage directly with academic environment to help add the rigor, give you the further expertise into applying more of the objective sciences and the objective research approaches to your project. For SOCOM, it's easy. We have our own university, Joint Special Operations University. For DBA students, it would be pretty easy to incorporate since they're working or they're going to school in an academic institution. The third piece is, if you're out in the field, is there a way to build relationships with academia? And I think by at least highlighting the importance of that can indirectly and directly improve that practitioner academic gap. because these practitioner researchers are popping up now from DBA programs, and they're kind of lay in the middle. Maybe you view them as arbitrators or mediators between true practitioners and academia. So the way ahead, moving forward with this project, no dissertation or project I think is ever really done. So looking at the format and the understanding piece, the more data analysis into a MBR case for the Muma business review. The actual framework, the goal is to provide it to Army Test and Evaluation Command, which is the organization which supports a lot of research projects, action research, applied research projects across not just Special Operations Command, but the greater military community. Present at the EMS conference in September out in Belgium to get feedback on the project itself and to have the framework illustrated to see what else can be done in improvements or just general feedback from other DBA programs. And then the last thing, a great future research type project I think maybe for students in the class coming in is how are these executive DBA programs impacting the practitioner academic gap sort of paradigm? And I think that's a good topic to explore because there is a bridging factor between true PhDs and practitioners. Where do these executive DBA graduates sort of fit in, and how are they affecting that way ahead? So with that said, that took 26 minutes out of the 1 hour scheduled for the period. So I think that should be probably a good target. You figure there'll be questions asked along the way, but if the content is 27 minutes, that leaves about 30 minutes questions. So I'm going to go ahead and check off this version. This is the third time I did this voiceover, so I'm going to submit this one, and we'll see how it goes. So thank you very much, and with that, we'll go ahead and press forward.